Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Hazard, Danger, Risk, and Fear, Effective Communication Through Examination of Misconception, with our guest, Dr. R. Neil Alexander of Bucephalus Consulting. My name is Lynn McDonald, and I am the Manager of Training here at the Radiation Safety Institute of Canada. Before starting, we would like to acknowledge that the spaces in which we work at the Institute here in Toronto are located on the traditional territories of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. Fergal Nolan National Laboratories in Saskatoon is located on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis people. We thank them for their care of the land and pay respect to them and their ancestors. We ask that during the presentation portion that the audio and video be from the presenter only. To turn on closed captions, go to More, Language and Speech, turn on Live Captions. Please use the chat feature for any discussions and post questions arriving from the content in the Q&A. This will help us to find your questions for the allotted Q&A portion while allowing people to have a conversation in the chat. As the webinar is only 40 minutes in length and is immediately followed by our wellness session, time may not permit for us to answer all of them during the webinar. The answers will be posted to our website, along with a link to the video recording and a copy of the slides. This can be found under Education Webinars on our website. I will be sending a confirmation of attendance email after the webinar and will include a link to the page with that communication. I will also include the topics covered and the length of time spent in the webinar, as some people have requested this to send to the Professional Association. As part of our mission to promote radiation safety and awareness through sharing of science and best practice, in our webinar series, we often bring guests with independent perspectives to address a topic. In this webinar, our guest, Dr. Neil Alexander, will examine the concepts of hazard, danger, risk, and fear, how they're conflated, and why it's important for radiation protection communication to teach the difference between them. Dr. Alexander is very familiar with ionizing radiation risk communication. Neil is the chief cheese at his company, Bucephalus Consulting, and is contracted 1 day a week to the Canadian Nuclear Society to be its head of communications. He has worked with radioactive materials throughout his 40-year-plus career, where as a jack of all trades and master of none, he has gained experience supporting plant maintenance and operations, decommissioning and waste management, transport, radioisotope production, small modular reactors, and fusion. He has held senior positions in industry, not-for-profits, and academia, including AECL, the University of Saskatchewan, the Organization of Canadian Nuclear Industries, and the United Kingdom Atomic Energy Authority. As this webinar is part of our ongoing Radiation Safety and Wellness webinar series, the final 20 minutes will be a wellness break of beginner Tai Chi with Charmaine Wong of Jiang Tai Chi and Qigong, Richmond Hill. The webinar will begin with the presentation and be followed by the Q&A should there be time. Please note that the webinar is for information purposes only. We do not provide legal or medical advice. So with that, I am going to turn the presentation over to Dr. Alexander. Neil, I don't know which you prefer, and he will take it from here until we hit the Q&A.
Neil works really well, and thank you very much. That was a very kind introduction. So I should say I was hoping to develop this. This is a theme that I've been developing for the Canadian Nuclear Society, and perhaps it isn't as focused on the ionizing radiation aspects as it could be. But I think you can see the analogies and make the extension yourself. So I did originally offer to do this as Bucephalus Consulting and then forgot. So I'm presenting it on behalf of the Canadian Nuclear Society because I used their slide set. But it's fairly generic stuff, so I think you'll hopefully learn something from it one way or the other. I do want to stress that I'm not a communications professional, and so these are very much my thoughts developed on dealing with the public, and they're there for discussion. So to give you something to think about, necessarily to give you the answer to dealing with the issues. If you progress to the next slide, I'll just say a little bit about the Canadian Nuclear Society, since they're sponsoring it. So Canadian Nuclear Society, if you don't know, is an independent learned society of individuals. So we're independent of any companies, there is another organization, the Canadian Nuclear Association, that represent the companies. And as well as us being individuals rather than representing companies, we do not have a mandate to lobby. So we are not trying to encourage people to have nuclear technologies. But we are interested in the use of nuclear technology in Canada, and we're interested in the use of Canadian nuclear technology around the world. And the mandate is to promote knowledge about it rather than to promote the technology. And that's, you know, we're always accused of promoting the technology, but that's just one of the crosses that we have to bear. If you move to the next slide. So we have a bunch of divisions covering all aspects of technology, and I wanted to stress this because people immediately go to just nuclear power, but we do have divisions looking at fusion energy. We have divisions looking at disruptive technologies in the industry, which is fairly generic but quite important to the nuclear industry. And we've just formed a space and nuclear applications division. We have a good science and technology of radioisotopes division. So and the divisions are basically run by the members for the members, and so if we have enthusiasm for any other subjects, then we would set that up. And then if you move to the mandate, which I think I've already covered, so we can probably skip that one and move to the next one. And this is the kind of thing the Canadian Nuclear Society does. So we have local events with our branches. We're most famous for organising conferences. We run a range of courses for industry. We are developing courses to provide to the public because we think that's going to be increasingly important. I do the media communications. We provide news updates, and most importantly, we try and correct misinformation, which is where I got a lot of this experience from. So moving into the main part of the presentation, going to start by just defining the aspects. In common use, these words are often used interchangeably, but it's important to any communication to filter them out and prevent the conflations causing confusion. So a hazard is something that has the potential to cause harm. So if we use the CN Tower as an example, and it's going to come back in the discussion later on, it is a hazard because you are a long way above the ground, and the potential to, if you fell to the ground, you would cause yourself a significant amount of damage. One of the things I find wonderfully ironic about it is if you fell to the ground, you'd crash through the roof of the aquarium and land in the shark tank, where you might be eaten by a shark if you didn't die of the impact. Not a huge danger, though. So a danger is a hazard that has some mechanism by which harm might be done to something. So in many ways, a danger is quite significantly different to a hazard because it has to have that mechanism for delivery of the harm. Risk is a word that's conflated right from the start because it has elements of both. If we go back to the CN Tower, yes, the CN Tower has a hazard associated with it, but is it really dangerous? Well, it hasn't actually done any harm to anyone that I'm aware of, because it simply has mechanisms to prevent the hazard being delivered to any of the people that visit it. So from that point of view, it's a hazard, but it isn't a danger. In terms of risk is a conflated word right from the start because it has elements of both the magnitude of the harm that might be done and the frequency or the likelihood of that harm happening. So as a word, it is staggeringly confusing right from the start. And then it is then quite often used in association with hazard or danger in an inappropriate way. And then finally, we have fear, which is what actually we end up dealing with, and that is the emotion or the awareness, the anticipation or awareness of danger. And fears may be real or imagined, as again we'll come to later. So you can see that if you can start unpacking those, you can start answering questions in a much clearer way. If we move to the next slide. We are in Canada at the moment about to embarking on having cited a deep geologic repository for used fuel. We are now embarking on developing the awareness of the safety to demonstrate that it can be done safely, and then building a deep geologic repository. And so there's quite a lot of discussion about used nuclear fuel at the moment. And this is a classic example where the words are being used inappropriately, and where before you have any discussion, you need to define the terms in order that people can make a rational decision about them. So the issues here are debate. You can debate my conclusions on them, but it's to get you thinking about them. The hazard is there is large amount of penetrating radiation that is being given off by used nuclear fuel. It also is a very concentrated form of toxic materials. So you could argue that it is a very, very hazardous material. But in terms of danger, it's actually a ceramic material that is easily contained. There is some transmutation into volatiles that could escape, but otherwise most of it is a solid. You know where it is, and as long as you put shielding around it, it's going to cause no danger at all. So I would argue that while it is very hazardous, it is not dangerous at all. And that actually can be seen in the statistics, in that in 70 years of more than 70 years now of the nuclear industry, with 400 plants plus around the world, no one has ever been harmed that we are aware of by the storage of used nuclear fuel. So it's not appearing dangerous at all. In terms of risk, potentially high consequence, but almost no possibility of that consequence being realized. So I'd say it's from a risk point of view, very little risk. And yet, at the end of the day, because it's unknown and not understood, and particularly we see anti-nuclear campaigners trying to turn what is a hazard and imply that it is a danger, we still see a lot of fear in the public with handling of used nuclear fuel. And that is unhelpful because it leads to them making inappropriate decisions about the way it should be dealt with. You move to the next slide. I've just had a go at doing the same thing for X-rays because I know a lot of the listeners here will be more interested in that form of radiation. So you could argue that the hazard, well, it is pretty hazardous because you have the control of large quantities of penetrating radiation. Is it dangerous? Well, in some ways, you could argue it's more dangerous than used nuclear fuel, in that it is being used on people's bodies with a very mild effect, and it is accessible if something went wrong, whereas the used fuel is not. So you could argue that X-ray machines have a little bit of danger with them, and we manage our way out of that to the best effect possible. It's not easily accessible, so there's not really a great deal of risk, but there is some risk that people might do that. In terms of fear, although I would be arguing that in some ways it's more dangerous than used nuclear fuel, nobody fears X-rays at all. I've just been in and had some fairly substantive X-rays done. I didn't give it a second thought. I knew it was going to be the right thing to do. Then we get to, if you go to the next slide, nuclear reactors. They're a complex mix. So from a hazard point of view, yeah, they're hazardous. Got significant quantities of radioactive material, large quantities of radiation being emitted. They also have, I point out to people, high voltages, high temperatures, and rotating machinery. So there are lots of hazards at a nuclear reactor. Are they dangerous? I didn't quite explain this one properly, but yeah, there's a potential for great danger. But is there a risk? well, there's a high consequence if something goes wrong, but a very, very low probability. And that's where things get really confused, because the human race has not been designed to weigh up those two challenges when they are so very, very different. And that leads to, in terms of the fear of nuclear reactors, some people are fearful of them, some people are not. And so you get a very polarized view on nuclear reactors. Moving on to the next slide, one of or a lot of my colleagues think that if people only understood the facts about nuclear power, then we would get rid of all of that fear, and many more people would support it. I don't believe that's the case. So again, going back to the CN Tower, facts are not always helpful. So I actually am a materials scientist by training, and I know that the glass plate in the CN Tower is as strong as anything in the concrete around it. And so I have no reason whatsoever to suppose that stepping onto the glass plate is any greater risk than being high up in the air and the CN Tower in the first place. I also, as a rational human being, have made the observation that no one else so far has fallen through the glass plate and died by being eaten by a shark in the aquarium below. So from a rational point of view, I know that I should not be fearful of that glass plate, and yet there is no way that I can stand on it. Explaining that it's safe is not going to help reduce that fear. I am still going to hold that fear. It is in me, and there is nothing that you can do about it. But understanding that facts aren't going to help is important in the discussion. Moving on to the next slide, I'm also concerned that very often facts not only don't help, but they are adverse to the discussion. So again, going back to the fact I'm a material scientist, and I hope this won't shock anyone, but when you do material science, you learn that cracks form in the skins of aircraft, and cracks remain stable until they can grow to a reasonably significant length. And so the engineers just watch them grow. When they get long enough and they think, well, that could, they institute a repair that can be as simple as drilling a hole in either end of the crack to stop it growing. So you can imagine my excitement as a young metallurgist when I looked out of the window of the plane I was in and I saw a wonderful crack that was propagating in the wing material, and that it had a hole drilled in either end of it. So I took great comfort from the fact that this plane had been properly inspected and was being looked after carefully. And to share this information with a gentleman sitting next to me, and pointed the crack out to him, not being aware of the fact that this was the first time he had been in a plane, and the reason he had held off for so long was that he was scared of flying. His interpretation of my review of the safety of the plane was very, very different to mine. And you know, people laugh at my story because they think, how can you be so stupid? And then I start pointing out the way that we do things. And in fact, one of the best examples, and I'm stealing it from a social scientist in the UK, a guy called Malcolm Grimstone, who came over and gave a series of presentations here. And he said, you know, going back to the Deep Geologic Repository, where we're dealing with the used nuclear fuel from nuclear reactors, and people say that they are fearful of it. And we say, you don't need to be fearful of it. We put it in these thick containers and we coat copper on the containers, and then we put them in bentonite boxes, and then we bury them 500 meters underground. And he says, any rational human being will have their fear increased by that discussion rather than decreased. And we need to learn a different dialogue about explaining that the used nuclear fuel in the first place may be hazardous, but it's not particularly dangerous, and that we can manage it quite simply. So that's a thought there. We often deal with radiation protection by trying to talk about natural radiation and background radiation. If you move on to the next slide. And we use diagrams like this, which are helpful in creating some of the context. But I think also we've got to do a bit of background preparation before we use them in order to answer a more fundamental question, which is the one on my next slide. Moving on to the next slide. There you go. It's what does safe actually mean? So if you look at the dictionary definition of safe, you find that it's the absence of all danger. But actually, we never use the word safe in that context in real life. And we all have different views on what is safe. I have routinely found myself, I'm you may have gathered, come from the UK, and our national, a very popular game in the UK is the game of rugby, which I routinely find myself explaining to people is a very safe game. This is not an opinion that was held by my mother when she came to pick me up from the hospital, but I would still argue that it is a safe game, and I will still tell people that it is a game to this day. But it does mean that when you're having discussions, people can, because that word is entirely uncalibrated, they can use it to catch you out. So you will classically hear people in the discussion saying, "Can you guarantee to me that it is safe?" Implying that you've got a guarantee it's 100% safe, when in fact nothing we do is 100% safe. So it's important to try and get them to understand what they mean by safe before the discussion even starts. So I have a line with people that come to me and say there is no level of radiation that is safe, and I talk to them about, well, could you tell me, do you actually look at how much radiation there is in your food before you eat it? And do you sleep in a lead coffin at night to prevent yourself from being exposed to radiation? And typically they say, no, they don't consider their food, and they don't sleep in a lead coffin. And I say, well, that means you have implicitly decided there is a level of radiation that you consider safe. It is the one that you currently live with. You are doing nothing to protect yourself against it. You must consider it to be safe. And then I refer back to the previous slide where you can see that the natural background radiation that people consider to be safe varies by orders of magnitude. So not only are you safe at the level of radiation that you're currently exist at, but by implication, you consider it safe to live in radiation fields that are orders of magnitude higher. If we move 2 slides forwards now, thank you for going back to that one. That was well thought out. I'm going to get on to some of the misconceptions that I deal with and some of the challenges behind them. And this one's like the safety argument. So you will often hear people say any bit of radiation can kill you. And the problem with that statement is it's kind of true, because we don't know which of the interactions with radiation might have not been dealt with by our other bodily functions to destroy it and give rise to the thing that ultimately ends up in a cancer. So it's sort of true, but it's very, very misleading. And it's important that people understand how it's misleading. So yeah, any bit of radiation can kill you, arguably, but any bit of anything can kill you. So I particularly refer to hugs because people generally consider them to be a good thing, but a hug is a remarkably effective way of transferring viruses from one person to another. And viruses, unlike radiation, which you'll know is a very weak cause of cancer, viruses are a very strong cause of cancer. So you never know which of the hugs you take might be the one that caused your cancer. A more obvious one is pieces of bacon, which people now understand contain cancerous elements. So we don't know which of the pieces of bacon. And I give whole presentations on the subject of bananas. We don't want to go there. I'm not going to explain the other ones to you. You already know them. But whilst you could say any bit of radiation can kill you, the fact is that tons of it is going on in your body all of the time, and it doesn't worry you. We have an extension of that, and this is just throwing this in because it's a misconception I deal with a lot. It's not really about ionizing radiation, but if you move to the next one, there is the concept that plutonium is the most toxic material on the planet. This actually comes out of the fact that plutonium is the most toxic element that we are aware of. But elements are not actually very toxic. So plutonium is actually about 20,000 times less toxic than Botox, which we inject into people's faces in order to make them feel that they look better. And plutonium, bizarrely, apparently, and I've never tested it, is about as toxic as caffeine. So that kind of puts it into calibration. So that's about, there are places where you do just have to create the context and convey the facts. I have one example now of what I call blowing away the fog, if you move to the next slide. And this relates to the Fukushima incident, where you can see people picking bits of information out of a fog and then putting them together to create a story. And here we see, I think people are probably aware that a man did die of cancer in Japan. That man had worked at Fukushima during the incident, and that later on, a Japanese court said that radiation was the cause, which immediately led newspapers around the world, and this is one from the UK, to put out headlines of this type, which says, Japan has announced for the first time a worker at the stricken Fukushima nuclear plant died after suffering radiation exposure, implying quite heavily in the reader's mind that it was Fukushima that caused the radiation exposure, but not telling the whole story. If you blow the fog away a bit, you start seeing the rest of the story. So not surprisingly, the cancer the gentleman developed couldn't have developed that quickly if it had been caused by, or it couldn't have developed to the state it did if it was caused by Fukushima. So you could be almost certain that Fukushima was not the cause of the incident. He was, however, a heavy drinker. Quite strong indications for the cancer that he ended up getting, and he had been doing the drinking and smoking for long enough for it to have been the cause. We also, if we look at his employment at the Fukushima plant, he had already received much higher accumulated doses of radiation from his work prior to going to Fukushima, and the dose he received while he was at Fukushima during the incident was not very significant. But still, we have a Japanese court saying that radiation was the cause, causing fear amongst the population that that must be the reason. Then you get to the final part of the jigsaw puzzle, you blow away the rest of the fog, and you see that that actually Japan has a law that means that in law, if you work at a nuclear plant and you get lung cancer, the nuclear plant will be found guilty of causing the cancer. So that actually the Japanese court was simply applying a law, not science at all, in coming to its conclusion, and it's related to the negotiations that took place with the unions and has nothing science fact whatsoever. So once you blow away that fog, you get a completely different story from the one that the media managed to put out in the first place. So I'm on a sort of campaign to get people out there trying to communicate better by understanding that facts themselves are not enough. You need to create a context to the facts, and that is, if you move to the next slide, people shining a light on the issues around the individual facts so that people can understand the context of them, rather than just being informed of data that may or may not actually help reduce their fears. And that's my thoughts on communicating about hazard, dangers, risks, and fears.
Well, thank you, Neil. That was amazing. In terms of starting the topic. Now, today, what we have about 10 minutes to take questions from people or thoughts on the topic. If you can put them into the Q&A, then we'll take them in the order and then open it up to the floor. So I'm just going to check to see if anybody has typed in the Q&A.
Right. Yeah, do I look for the chat, or do you ask me the questions?
I'll read them out to you if there are some here. There are some in the chat, and then after, if we have time afterwards, and we'll just open up to the floor so people can unmute. So first, we have a bunch of assistants in here taking notes. And okay, so here is one. How do cultural differences, environmental contexts, and measurement systems influence individuals' perceptions of concepts such as hazard, risk, and fear? What types of effective communication strategies can help minimize these disparities and foster a unified understanding in response to multicultural or international settings? So going back, so it's cultural differences, environmental contexts, and measurement systems.
Yeah, so that is a very good question. It touches on something I meant to include in my presentation and forgot about, and that is in communications, the big challenge that people typically have is they make the assumption that other people think in the same way that they do, and they don't. So the answer to all of those questions is to know your audience. And if you don't know your audience, before making assumptions about what they are going to think, probe what their position is and ask questions of them before trying to answer. Very, very often we answer questions in a way that makes sense to us, and as a result cause more problems than if we hadn't answered the question in the first place. So I can't talk to the specifics of those issues, but I think that the overall message is do not make assumptions. If you're uncertain about something, ask them questions and learn where they're coming from, where their positions are, what their fears are, and why they fear it, and then address those rather than jumping to the conclusion that they need a piece of information from you that's going to satisfy them.
In terms of measurement systems, just going back to that, that is something that when we are doing training courses that we go through the radiation quantities and units, because those are often not known to the general public or to people coming into safety officer positions or working around it. And I have seen other comments about, when they're talking volumes of water or the difference between activity, which is the radioactive decay, and dose, which is the energy that's being deposited, right? You can have something that's decaying away quite quickly, but the energy of each individual radiation particle coming off it is quite low. So yeah, trying to get the basic, always try to think about just giving the amount of information that's needed for people to understand. If you don't mind me hopping in just with a piece of advice, because we all come in sometimes with information we're excited about and we want to share with people because we found it interesting, but sometimes by adding in too much detail, that we lose the forest for the trees kind of thing. So, and around those measurement systems, it is important to try to, like, what's the bare minimum amount of science background do we need to communicate in order to tell the full story?
And to give, you reminded me of something where there's an absolute classic example of where the public responds in a way that it is encouraged to respond without actually having any reality of the situation whatsoever. So you talk there about water, the headlines for the Fukushima water were in terms of millions of tons. Millions of tons of water is not in any way an indication of either the hazard or danger, right?
Yeah.
And yet people would read those headlines and go, this must be a bad thing, simply because it was implied to them that it must be a bad thing. And so I would sit there and I'd ask questions like, say, if I took that million tons and I turned it into 2 million tons, would that be safer or less safe than the million tons? And if I took your million tons of water and I made it into a kilogram of water, would that make it more or less safe? And people have never thought about those things, but when they do start thinking, they can start realizing how they've been tricked into being fearful of something that they really don't have any reason to be fearful of.
Yeah, and on the other hand, made comfortable with some things maybe that normally they wouldn't accept.
Or at least,
yes,
all I've done there is I haven't given them the answer, but I've given them the question to go and look at, and then decide whether they think it's a risk or not, but on the basis of reality rather than of a fear that had been
Yes.
created by a newspaper that had a headline that was designed to sell newspapers.
Yes. Okay, so next question, and I see there's one that's in the Q&A, so I will go back and forth between the two, trying to follow time. Do you think that providing comparisons to more accepted or common exposures is a good strategy? For example, hairdryer use versus distance to EMF from power line. Are there instances where this is not possible or not helpful?
Yeah, no, I saw that one come up. That's a very good question. I think comparisons are absolutely essential because people cannot get their and unless you give them some reality, they can't get their head around the issues. They're not trained in them. They don't understand them. So comparisons are really, really useful. The challenge is to make sure that they are appropriate, or if they are not appropriate, to point out which bits of them are appropriate and which bits are not appropriate. So the reason I say that is in the nuclear industry, the classic is the banana, and people have calculated the additional dose that you get from eating a banana. And that is a real challenge in very many ways. So I think people are aware that the radiation dose from bananas comes from the potassium they contain, but the body controls the amount of potassium. So it goes in, it comes out, and the body keeps pretty much the same amount. So talking about an additional dose from eating a banana is probably not appropriate. But talking about bananas is appropriate because you can then talk about all the other issues of toxicity that need to be considered, like how your body processes something, in order to get people to start understanding the context.
Okay.
But yeah, I like it. Analogies, and one of the things I wish the industry, well, and anyone communicating about radiation, if we sat down and we went through all of the issues and picked good analogies and then communicated them to people so they could use them, I think that would be a really helpful thing to do, rather than leaving people struggling to find the best analogies.
Okay, so one other one that's here that came on early in, how should communication strategies be during an accident versus on, I assume, day-to-day things?
Yeah.
So do they vary?
Easier said than done, right? So the big problem with an accident scenario, and I have never had to deal with one, but I have watched them being dealt with. The big problem is that people want you to make predictions, and that is the thing that has to be avoided. So in any communication people are going to push, it's like, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? And it's really a good idea to avoid expressing an opinion and just to keep pinning people back to the facts. This is what we know. This is what is possible, rather than I expect, or this could happen, or making projections like that, because the projections are almost universally wrong. So
Yes.
it's
Yeah.
and then you just lose trust, you lose credibility, and so it's better just stick with the facts in that circumstance.
And the other thing is as you had said in your presentation, everyone has a different opinion of what is safe and what is not safe. So if you give them the facts, they can then make their own decision rather than to lead
Right.
how they feel, is what you're saying. Yeah.
And the context around them, right? So to bound the issue so that they don't start developing huge unrealistic fears of things that might happen. I mean, I think one of the things that's really frightening is in Fukushima, a lot of people died as a result of scaremongering about what might happen, and that's in the end was totally unnecessary. Taking sensible precautions because we didn't know what was going to happen, that was necessary, but scaring people into committing suicide and other events that occurred, that was not helpful. And one of the things I say is, like, should we be stopping the nuclear industry, or should we be stopping people scaremongering, because the scaremongers killed more?
Yeah. Okay, so in the Q&A, in previous risk communication training I've done, the role of voluntary versus involuntary exposure has been highlighted as a key factor in fear and outrage. I'd be curious to hear about your thoughts on this factor as well, especially in the context of your X-ray versus nuclear fuel disposal. Some people might consider the voluntary versus involuntary exposure, since you can choose whether or not to have an X-ray, but not feel like you have a meaningful say in the siting of waste disposal sites.
Yeah, so I'm absolutely certain that does make a difference, but I think relying on it too heavily implies a more rational response from human beings than they actually have. So I think there is that difference between voluntary and involuntary, but it's not as big as I think a lot of people make out, and the excuse to avoid the sort of innate fears that people might have, and getting to understand what they might be, just by putting them in those two buckets. I think you avoid getting into the deeper understanding of the issues. I'm not explaining that very well. I just, I'm sure it does make a difference, but it's not what I have seen people responding to.
Good. So dig a little deeper is what you're saying.
Dig a
Or
little
be
deeper.
sure to
Yeah.
be sure to dig. Okay. Do you find that informing the public about how much radiation they are already exposed to every day a helpful mechanism, or can it just make people more fearful? So I know that you can, like, there's a Canadian dose calculator, things like that out there. Do you find that helpful?
Yeah, I think that largely lost it. Where I found success is going back to that discussion that I had in the presentation, which says, what do you consider safe, and get them to understand that they already can feel that they're safe, and then talk to them about the things that they do that they consider safe, right? And then that it's not leading with the did you know that Brazil nuts are 1,000 times more radioactive than anything else you eat, and would be considered a low-level waste if they were produced on a nuclear plant.
Yeah.
Right. But you can
Yeah.
say, do you eat Brazil nuts? It's like, right, well, do you consider that safe? Yes. In which case, and then you've got an intro to it. But I think you've got to tag it to the what is safe, and get them to understand that they already feel safe. They're not doing anything about it. So simply knowing about it shouldn't change the level of safety.
Right. So I'm just going to take a look at the Q&A here. We're just about at a time. And I'll just take this last one, the Q&A, and anything else that's there, we will get it written up afterwards. And it's like often I meet people who have preformed internal story of radiation, which makes it hard to correct information. How can we shift people's internal stories about radiation? I think that goes back to your answer to your previous question, probably.
Well, and no, it's one of the issues I get up and talk about a lot. We have allowed misconceptions to circulate, and they have been repeated so often they have become the truth in people's minds. And I deal with people routinely that cannot change their mind. It is cognitive dissonance that what they have believed all their life may not be true, and they're never going to change their minds. That said, I think it's really important that we do get out and talk about these issues in order that future generations do not have those same misconceptions drilled into them, but they hear the broader discussion and can put things in context. So I think it is really important. We have to accept that some people's minds are never going to be changed, but I still think we need to, have the discussion with them, because other people are listening, and we cut down that repetition of the mistakes that have been made in the past.
Okay. And sometimes there's a historical reason going back, like when the radiation first came out, right? There's things like the radium watch dial painters and things like that happened. And we don't want the pendulum to swing too far in either direction, right? Put the information out there, give people the context, and then they can make their own health and safety decisions. But to have the fair information. Because like you said, some of these things do have great hazard, but we put health and safety things in place to try to keep the dangers low. And it's trying to go back to those terms and look at what's being done to lower the dangers around them in their workplaces. So, all right. With that, again, looking at the time, that I think we could probably talk all day on the topic. Did you have a last thought that you want to share with the group before we move on to our Tai Chi?
No, I think you kind of summarized. I just wanted to say in your comment there, it's all about context. So yeah, you know what? In the past, we did get some things wrong, but then so did every other industry. Like we learn, and people need to understand that that is the case. And you can't say, well, something happened 70 years ago, therefore it's going to happen again today. It's not the case, and get people to understand that's not the way the world works.
Okay. Well, thank you, Neil, Dr. Alexander.
Neil will do. Yeah.
Neil will do. So thank you for being here today. We do appreciate your time and your expertise. And it was great having you here. I just want to let people know, if you have questions about any radiation safety topic, please feel free to contact us at the Radiation Safety Institute of Canada. We're not-for-profit. Part of what we do is give out science-based information on these topics, ionizing and non-ionizing. And so we have a toll-free information service to support questions from employers, workers, and the public with respect to all this different types of radiation. We also provide consulting services for those who might need support in developing a radiation protection program or related services, including radiation surveys. If you have any further questions about these topics, contact us at 1-800-263-5803 or by email at info@radiationsafety.ca. We also have quite a number of free resources on our website, and we are on Facebook, LinkedIn, and YouTube. So with that, we'll say goodbye to Dr. Alexander. We'll take away any of the questions that are still remaining in the chat and write those up and put them on our website. And I will send an email out once all of that is together. It usually takes a few days, and let people know where they can find that. So we will now move to our 20-minute wellness break in the form of beginner Tai Chi, led by Charmaine Wong of Jihong Tai Chi and Qigong in Richmond Hill, Ontario. Welcome, Charmaine. We realize that some may have to go as their lunch breaks end, but appreciate people participating as they can. So I'm going to stop sharing so that Charmaine can. And again, we'll move things over. Hello? Hi, I can see you fine. All right, okay. I'm just going to spotlight you for everyone.
Okay, so welcome to the wellness session. I appreciate everybody who's staying for that. Before I start, I just want to reiterate the fact that I'm doing this virtual session out of my home studio. Our school has a much better facility in Richmond Hill, so please feel free to visit our website to check for the address. We are actually starting a new term today, so a term of 12 weeks of classes. So feel free to check our schedule on the website, and feel free to pay a visit to our school address for a free trial class if you're interested at all. All right, so let's get started by standing up from the chair, and with a good posture, I would like you to feel how it feels like when you're really standing tall with your spine extended up, not particularly tight or stiff, yet you want to concentrate on being tall with your spine extended, elongated upward. All right, then now the camera is doing a natural mirror of me to you. So when I'm going to this direction, it should be your right, and this direction should be your left. I hope that is still the case. All right, so then we should step out. Usually we use our left foot to step our stance to shoulder width apart. Let's do a couple of warm-up exercises. All right, so now first of all, you interlace your fingers, and then as you raise your hands up to about chest level, turn the palms up and stretch up, again with a very long spine. Then you just let go of your fingers, open the arms sideways, bring them down, and then do a gentle mini squat. You don't have to go very low. We just want to warm up our legs, warm up our joints. And then we repeat several times like that. When you extend upward, feel like you are really doing a good stretch, and you can breathe in. And then as you let go, you slowly breathe out. Let's repeat a couple more times. Breathe in. And breathe out. Now this is a warm-up exercises that we take from Qigong, which is very closely related to Tai Chi. It's something simple enough that you can do a few times a day so that you can just stretch and relax and get off the chair after sitting for too long at your desk. Let's do it just one last time. Breathe in. Breathe out. All right, then you can relax. Then we're going to do a second move, which takes a little bit more from Tai Chi principles. All right, so now step out back to shoulder width apart, if you haven't already done so. Then now turn the palms up and raise your arms on both sides of the body. Bring them up to the top. And then as you sit down, imagine you are using your core to draw the elbows down. And then you continue to gently put the hands down, and then we're going to do that again. Now this move is similar to the previous one. The main difference that I want you to focus on here is that you are imagining using your core to draw the elbows down, which then pull the hands down. Again, imagining you're pulling something heavy from above, which needs your core to do the initiation. And one last time. The Tai Chi is an internal martial art, so we focus a lot on how we engage our mind to direct different parts of our body. This is one example of that. Okay, all right. Now then, we're gonna actually do some Tai Chi moves. There are two moves that we plan to do today, just like usual. We're gonna do the first one, which is called cloud hands, or like waving your hands like clouds floating in the sky. So the cloud hands move requires what we call a horse stance. So we have our feet at least shoulder width apart, or if you can go down a little bit lower, we're gonna step further than shoulder width apart, and then we're gonna squat, right? So it's very similar to what we call a squat. The main thing you wanna pay attention to is that when you squat, you need to bend your knee joints as well as your hip joints. Now I'm going up and down a few times to practice how we hinge our hip joints as we sit. I'm going to show you a side view so you can see more clearly. As we bend our knees, we also hinge the hip joints as if we are trying to sit on the saddle of a horse or sit on a chair. It's very important that we do that in addition to bending of our knees, because otherwise we would put too much pressure onto our knee joints. At the same time, we want to keep our body upright. Tai Chi emphasizes a lot on proper biomechanics, which means good posture. So we want to have a straight, long spine extended upward even when we're going down. This is how it should look like. All right. Now, after practicing that, let's do our hands. How does a cloud hand arms move like if we do the prompt properly. All right. So first of all, we want to have one hand up. Let's say in this case, I have my left hand up, the upper hand at chest level with the palm facing to myself, and the other hand with the palm facing down on a little bit onto my right side of the body. All right. Then we just go to one side, and then we switch the two hands. And then we go back to the other side. And that's how we do the hand movements in this particular Tai Chi move. We turn our body slightly once we move sideways. Let's say I move to my right now at the end of the range, I turn my body slightly. What you need to make sure of is that when I'm going to my left hand is at chest height. And when I'm going to my right hand is at chest height. That's what you need to make sure happens. One last time going back to the left side, and we're going to add our footwork. All right. Now footwork is pretty simple. We start with the horse stance and we just go sideways. All right. So let's start with, let's say I'm going to go a little bit more onto this side, and we can practice walking to the right side if you have that space. All right. Now, so again, put your feet at least shoulder width apart, squat a little bit so that you have a horse stance. Put your right hand up, the left hand in front of you, or a little bit onto the side. Then you step with your right foot sideways. And then I move my body over, moving my hands as well. At the end of the range, I switch my hands, and then I draw my left foot back to a narrower stance. And then I move my weight onto my left foot again. I switch my hands again and step my right foot so that I can move on to my right side. At the end of the range, I switch my hands and step my left foot. Now, if we try to do this really slowly, you would find that it's more difficult because you have to maintain your leg strength in order to hold your balance when you step from one foot to another. That's how we train the strength and balance of our body. Let's do that one last time to this direction. All right. You can take a rest and stand back up. Otherwise, let's get going again. Let's go back to the opposite direction. With your left hand up, you step your left foot. You switch your hand positions, and then you step back your right foot, and you move on to the right side. At the end of the range of moving sideways, you want to turn the body a little bit. Let's say going to the left, my body is slightly turned to the left. That's how we maintain the closing or the bending of our hip joint as we stay on that one leg as we step the other foot. Okay, so that was simple enough, but it's a very good practice for building our lower body strength and balance. All right, now the second move that we like to cover in these sessions is called parting while horses mane. So what it looks like in terms of the lower body first is that we're gonna do a bow stance, as in a bow and arrow bow. So what it looks like, I'm just gonna show it to you first, is that we have one leg forward and the other leg at the back. The legs forward have the toes pointing straight to the front, whereas the leg at the back, the toes are turned out to about 45 degrees. So that's how a bow stance looks like. I'll show you a side view. In terms of the weight distribution, we have more weight on the front leg, so the knee is slightly bent. The leg at the back, almost straight, not quite with locking the knee joint, but mostly this is the bow with the knee bent, and this is the arrow with the straight leg at the back. So the weight distribution is like that. With the body posture, straight up again. Okay, now we can switch to the other side. so that you can practice each leg. It would be the same. So the front toes pointing forward, the back toes pointing out 45 degrees, like that. Body square to the front with the hip square to the front. All right, so this is the bow stance. Now, when we step forward from standing to the one step forward to a bow stance, we typically turn one set of toes. Let's say in this case, I'm going to step forward my left foot, so my right toes are turned and pointed out to about 45 degrees. I'm going to move my weight entirely onto my right side, pick up the left leg, put down the heel of the left foot, and then you gradually shift weight to the front leg to go to that bow stance. All right, let's try the other side, and then we're going to practice it a couple of times for each leg again. Let's say you turn your left toes out. That would become your back leg. Gently pick up the right foot, put down the heel, and then move your weight back to the front. All right, now let's practice the other side again. Let's say this time we practice it 2 times on each side. All right, so turning your right toes out. Now it's helpful to also turn the body slightly to the right as you move your weight onto your right leg. It helps with this hip joint here. Then we slowly pick up that left foot, put down the heel gently, as lightly as you can. This is the way to train our balance and strength as you step really light-footedly. All right, there's a phrase, that is the correct word. All right, and then let's do it again, same side. Right toes turned out. Move the weight, good balance on the right foot, put down the left heel gently, and then you move your weight. And then we're going to practice the other side again, 2 times, and then we're going to add our arms. Turn your left toes out, 45 degrees, move the weight entirely with that left foot, pick up the right heel, gently put it down, with control, then you move forward. One last time. Turn your left toes out. Move your weight. Gently put down that heel and move the weight forward into a bow stance. All right, then we're just going to practice the arms. With the parting of the wild horse's mane, it looks like this. We have one hand up with the palm facing down, the other hand at the bottom here with the palm facing up. So it's like we are holding a jar, holding a ball in between our palms. We typically call this a hold ball. All right, so now let's say I have a hold ball like this with my left hand on top, right hand at the bottom. The parting wild horse's mane involves just separating our 2 arms. The upper hand presses down, the lower hand just goes diagonally to the opposite corner. Let's do that again. Let's do that together if you haven't been following. So left hand on top, right hand at the bottom, holding a big ball. Then we just separate the 2 arms. One goes down, one goes up, diagonally. One last time. After you have whole ball, this time we have the left hand on top. Let's turn our body slightly because we like to use our body turning back to the front to help create that momentum for our arms to open up. One last time on the same side here. Left hand over right hand with the body turning back to square to the front. We separate those 2 arms. Let's do it on the other side. This time we have our right hand on top at about chest height, the left hand at about waist height. Let's start with the body turned slightly to the right. And then we open as we turn back to square to the front. Let's do that again. Now, since we have the right hand on top of our left hand, we call this a right hold ball. And then as we square, We separate those two hands. One last time for that practice, and then we're going to add our footwork. Right hold ball, body slightly turned to the right. And then as we square, we separate those two arms. Okay, then we're going to add our footwork. Now, first of all, let's try with our right toes turned out. Right toes turned out, we're going to move our weight to our right foot, which means we would have to have a right hold ball, which means your right hand is on top of your left hand. Now, first of all, like we did before, we step our left heel forward. We're going to go toward a bow stance. As we shift our weight, we square our body to the front, and then we open those two hands. Let's do that again. Turn to the right a little bit with the right toes and the body as well. And then we have a right hold ball. After the weight is firmly on the right foot, step forward with the left heel. As you shift weight to the front, more to the front foot, we square our body and separate those hands. Let's do that one more time on the same side. Right foot turned out. Body also turns slightly 45 degrees towards the right. Right hold ball. After the weight is firmly on the right foot, step forward the left heel, then slowly shift your weight to more to the front leg and open those hands. Okay, let's practice the other side. Turn, left toes out. Do a left hold ball, left hand on top, right hand at the bottom at waist height. Then the weight is firmly on the left foot as we step out the right heel. And then as we turn and square to the front to the bow stance, we open the two hands. All right, let's try that a couple more times. Turn. Weight is on your left foot now, left hold ball. Pick up the right heel. Step forward gently. Shift weight and open. Tai Chi is done slowly, which is more challenging to your balance and your strength, as well as is a good meditative exercise so that you can concentrate on what you're doing, and the slowness also calm your mind. Parting wild horses me. All right, just one last time, same side. Okay, so those two are individual moves taken out from a routine of any Tai Chi form, which is the Yang style Tai Chi form that we were practicing just now. If you'd like to learn the full set of Tai Chi, feel free to investigate more or to come to our school and you can try it yourself. All right, so let's do a cool down before we finish our session. So gently just place your hands in front of you, raise them to about waist height. Turn the palms back to yourself and then down for just a gentle circle. We're going to do it a couple more times. We're going to add breathing this time. Slowly breathe in. Slowly breathe in. One last time. Breathe in. Breathe in. All right, so that concludes our session for today. Thank you for staying behind, and I'll turn it over back to you, Lynn.
Thank you, Charmaine, for being here and leading us through the Tai Chi, and it will help us for the afternoon, hopefully, to stay awake and alert. So everyone, we'll be having another webinar in June, and I'll have the information out in a few more weeks. And again, once we get the video processed, I'll send out an email to everyone. So thank you, and hopefully we'll see everyone again next time.